I planned my 70th birthday dinner thinking it would be a quiet evening. I never imagined it would be the night I realized my son-in-law had been slowly killing me. Let me back up. My name is Roger. I'm 70 years old now, retired from 32 years in commercial real estate, and I live in the same 4-bedroom colonial in Naperville, Illinois, that my late wife Joanne and I bought back in 1987. She passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. The kind that moves fast and doesn't give you time to prepare. After she died, the house felt like a museum, every room holding something of hers, every corner reminding me she wasn't coming back. But I stayed. The house was paid off. The neighborhood was quiet. And my daughter Renee lived only 20 minutes away with her husband, a man named Clayton, who I'd always found a little too smooth for my taste, but who I tried, for Renee's sake, to like. That's the thing about getting older. You get good at overlooking things you probably shouldn't overlook. The health problem started about 2 years ago. Fatigue at first, the kind I wrote off as getting older, as being alone too long, as not eating right. Then came the tremors in my hands. Slight, barely noticeable, but there. My doctor ran blood work, checked my thyroid, looked at everything he could think of. He kept saying the same thing. Stress, Roger, you need to manage your stress better. He prescribed me something for blood pressure and sent me home. What none of us considered, what I never once thought to ask about, was that someone in my own family might be making me sick on purpose. Clayton started coming around more after Joanne died. At first I was grateful. He'd stop by on weekends, help with things around the house, fix the gutter over the garage, replace a light fixture I'd been ignoring for months. Renee seemed pleased that they were spending time with me. I told myself I'd been too hard on him, that I'd misjudged him because he wore expensive watches and talked too much about money. He was attentive. That's the word I'd use now with a sour taste in my mouth. Attentive. He noticed when my supplements ran out and offered to pick up more. He started buying me a specific brand of heart support vitamins, the ones in the dark green bottle. Because he'd read an article, he said, about men over 65 and cardiac health. He'd bring them by every 3 or 4 weeks, fresh bottles each time. I thanked him every time. I took one every morning with my coffee, like clockwork. About a year into this routine, I started feeling worse instead of better. My hands shook more. I'd get dizzy standing up too fast. Twice I had to sit down in the middle of the grocery store because the room tilted. My doctor added a second medication, this one for what he thought might be early-stage arrhythmia. Still nothing definitive, still no real answers. Renee worried. She called more often, came by for dinner on Sundays. Clayton came too, always helpful, always friendly, always making sure my glass was full, and my supplements were visible on the kitchen counter. I should have seen it. I still ask myself how I didn't. The idea for the birthday dinner was mine. 70 felt like a milestone worth marking, and I thought it would be good to have the family together. Renee and Clayton, my son Patrick, who flew in from Portland, my sister Adele and her husband from Rockford, and a few old friends from the neighborhood. I booked a private room at Carmine's, an Italian place downtown that Joanne and I used to love. 20 people, 3 courses, open bar. I also decided, quietly and without telling anyone, to update my will. I'd been meaning to do it for years. The old will divided everything evenly between Renee and Patrick. Straightforward. But my estate attorney had been nudging me to revisit it, to think about trusts, about tax implications, about what I actually wanted to happen to the house. So in the weeks before the birthday dinner, I met with her 3 times and we drew up something new. I didn't make dramatic changes. But I did put the house into a trust that neither Renee nor Patrick could access outright until 5 years after my death, structured so it couldn't be sold quickly. My attorney suggested it. I agreed without thinking too hard about why it mattered. At the dinner, I made the announcement after the salads were cleared. I kept it brief, told them I'd updated my will, that everything was in order that I wanted them to know. I said I was in good health and expect to be around for another 20 years, making their lives difficult. Everyone laughed. Patrick raised his glass. Clayton smiled. I don't know how to explain it except to say that I've been reading people my whole career, and something about that smile was wrong. It was too fast. It arrived before the others did, before the laughter, like he'd been waiting for a specific cue and his face responded on instinct. Renee was smiling at me warmly. Adele was dabbing her eye. Clayton was already composed, already settling back into his chair, that smile tucking itself away. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I'd always been too suspicious of him. 3 days after the dinner, I got a phone call. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was a woman, older, calm. She said her name was Loretta, and that she lived 2 streets over from me. She said she'd been my neighbor for 6 years, and that we'd waved to each other from our driveways enough times that she felt she could say what she needed to say. Then she said, I think you should have those vitamins tested. I went completely still. She told me she'd seen Clayton's car parked in front of my house on a Tuesday morning when he had no reason to be there. When Renee was at work and I was at my doctor's appointment. She'd seen him go in through the side gate with a key. She'd watched him come out maybe 8 minutes later. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but she'd been watching me over the past year, the way I walked to the mailbox more slowly, the way I sometimes stopped midway up my driveway to catch my breath, and something had been sitting wrong with her for months. She'd prayed about whether to call. She finally did. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't even remember deciding to sit. I was just suddenly on the floor, back against the cabinet, the phone against my ear, trying to breathe. I looked at the green bottle on the counter. I had not taken one that morning. Some reflex I couldn't explain, had made me skip it. I'd been distracted. I'd forgotten. Now I was staring at it like it was a grenade. I thanked Loretta. I asked her if she'd be willing to talk to someone official if it came to that. She said yes without hesitating. I called my doctor first. I told him I had a concern about possible contamination in a supplement. I didn't say more than that. He told me to bring the bottle in and he'd have it sent to the lab. I drove it over that afternoon in a Ziploc bag, wearing a dish towel over my hand so I didn't add more fingerprints. My doctor called me 4 days later. His voice was different, careful. The capsules had been partially emptied and refilled. Not all of them, maybe a third. Mixed in with the remaining supplement powder was a compound that, taken in small doses over an extended period, could cause cardiac irregularities, neurological symptoms, chronic fatigue. The kind of thing that mimics natural decline in an older man. The kind of thing a doctor might miss because he's not looking for it. My doctor said he was legally required to report it. I said I knew. I told him to go ahead. I didn't call Renee right away. I sat with it for a day. I kept thinking about the two of them at my kitchen table, Clayton refilling my water, Renee telling me I looked tired and should rest more. I thought about every Sunday dinner. Every time he brought a new bottle over, cheerful, carrying it in like a gift. Every tremor in my hands that I'd blamed on age. I called Patrick first. He was on a flight back before I finished explaining. Patrick and I had always been close in the uncomplicated way that comes from similarity. He's careful, analytical, slow to anger. He listened to everything I said without interrupting me once. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Dad, we need to call a lawyer before you do anything else." He was right. We called my estate attorney first. She wasn't a criminal attorney, but she knew who to call. Within 48 hours, I had a meeting with a detective from the Naperville Police Department and a private attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse. The detective was a woman named, and I remember this clearly because she had the bearing of someone who had heard every possible story and was not surprised by any of them. She was just steady, professional. She told me the lab results were significant and that they were going to move forward. They asked me not to contact Renee or Clayton yet. That was the hardest part, not the betrayal itself. I was still too numb to feel the full weight of it. The hardest part was calling Renee every Sunday like nothing had changed. Listening to her tell me about the new kitchen backsplash she'd picked out. Asking her how work was going. Telling her I loved her when we hung up. She sounded so normal, so entirely like my daughter. I kept asking myself if she knew. If she had any idea what her husband had been doing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning with his own key to my house. The detective asked me the same question. I told her I genuinely didn't know. That I hoped with everything I had that the answer was no. In the third week, my attorney received a disclosure through the investigation that Clayton had made 3 separate inquiries to real estate attorneys in the past 18 months about the process of selling property held in a living trust, specifically in cases where the property owner was elderly or incapacitated. He had not yet done anything actionable, but the pattern was clear. He had also, it turned out, been quietly consulting a financial advisor about a commercial real estate venture that required significant capital he did not have. He'd put nothing down on paper, but there were emails. There were always emails. My house, fully paid off, assessed at just over $800,000 in the current market, would have been exactly enough. The arrest happened on a Wednesday morning. I wasn't there. My attorney had advised me to be elsewhere, and I was grateful for that advice, because I'm not sure what I would have done if I'd had to watch it. I was at Patrick's hotel eating breakfast when my attorney called and said it was done. I drove to Renee's house that afternoon. She met me at the door. She had clearly been crying for hours. Her eyes were swollen and she stood in the doorway like she wasn't sure whether to let me in or whether she even had the right to ask me to come in. I stepped forward and held my daughter. She cried into my shoulder the way she hadn't since she was a little girl. She told me she hadn't known. She told me she had trusted him completely. She told me she was sorry in the helpless way people say it when they feel responsible for something they didn't do. I believed her. I still believe her. Not because I needed to, but because I know my daughter's voice when she's telling me the truth. We sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours. She made coffee. We talked. We talked about Clayton, about the marriage, about things she had noticed and pushed aside, small inconsistencies, times he'd been vague about money or why he was somewhere he hadn't mentioned. She cried more. I didn't try to stop her or tell her it was okay. It wasn't okay, but she was going to get through it. The investigation expanded. A detective in Joliet reached out because a similar pattern had emerged with Clayton's uncle, an older man who had been in declining health and who had died 2 years prior. The toxicology from his original death investigation had been inconclusive. With the new information, they were reopening it. Clayton's attorney entered a not guilty plea. The trial is still pending as I write this. At my follow-up appointments, my doctor reduced my blood pressure medication after 3 weeks off the contaminated supplements. After 2 months, the tremors were almost entirely gone. My last blood work came back clean across the board. He said it with a kind of disbelief, like the numbers on the page still surprised him. I told him they surprised me too. I still live in the Colonial in Naperville. I still drink my coffee in the same chair by the kitchen window where I can watch the yard come alive in the morning. Loretta from 2 streets over came over for coffee last month. She is 74 and sharp as anyone I've ever met in my life, and she brought a lemon cake that she made herself and did not make a single comment about what a hero she was, which is exactly how you can tell someone is genuinely good. Renee comes for Sunday dinners again. It took a few months before it felt natural. Some Sundays it still doesn't, not entirely. We don't talk about Clayton unless she brings him up, and when she does, I listen. She's been seeing a therapist. She started talking about going back to the graduate program she'd deferred years ago when she married him. Patrick calls every few days. He doesn't say much, usually. He asks how I'm feeling. He asks if I need anything. That's how he shows love. Quietly, consistently, without needing to name it. I think about Joanne sometimes and wonder what she would have seen in Clayton that I missed. Probably nothing. She would have seen exactly what I saw and ignored. The same thing I ignored because I wanted my daughter to be happy. She would have trusted her gut about him years ago, and she would have been right. The vitamins are gone. I buy my own supplements now, single ingredient, from a pharmacy I drive to myself. I read every label. I know that's not a system. I know that if someone truly wants to harm you, reading labels isn't what stops them. What stops them is a neighbor who prays about whether to make a phone call and then makes it anyway. What stops them is a daughter who, when she finally understood what her husband had been doing inside her own marriage, chose her father. What stops them is deciding, at 70 years old, still in the house where you raised your children, still in the chair by the window where the light comes in right in the morning, that you are not done yet, that there are still Sundays ahead worth protecting. I am alive and I intend to stay that way.